Hello, Year 11. What today's lesson is going to have a look at, it is going to be 4 types of relations. So there are 4 that we're going to have a look at, and we haven't seen these by these names before, but there's one-to-one, many-to-one, one-to-many, and many-to-many. What we have looked at and are familiar with is the vertical line test. So we looked at the vertical line test earlier on in our chapter, and we basically drew a vertical line through our graphs to decide whether they were a function or not. If that vertical line hit in only one spot as we moved along those vertical lines, it was a function. If it hit at more than that one point, that was going to be called a relation. So we want to now look at a horizontal line test as well. And the horizontal line test works very similar to the vertical line test in that when we draw horizontal lines through our function and it only hits at one point, we'd actually call that graph a one-to-one graph or a one-to-one relation, or in this case it would actually be a one-to-one function because we've also passed the vertical line test. So I'll show you an example of that. So if we have a look in our textbook here, which has got some really good examples, and we have a look at this graph here onto the left, it looks like it is of the form of an exponential. We've got vertical lines that we could pass through here, and we would see that at each vertical line it would only cut at one point, so it's a function, so it passes the vertical line test. But the horizontal line test, we're basically doing the same but drawing horizontal lines. So it's passing that horizontal line test in that it only hits at one point through every horizontal line, which it does. Then we would call it one-to-one. That means for every x value, there is only one y value. And as you get better at these, you might be able to just look at that graph and go, well, if I pick the point -1 on the x-axis, I'd only have one matching y value that hits that curve. So that would be called one-to-one. And going back to our notes, that would mean if it is one-to-one, then there is a one-to-one correspondence between the domain, our x values, and the range, our possible y values. If it passes the vertical line test, however, it fails the horizontal line test, we would say it was many-to-one. So if it fails, it would be many-to-one. And if we jump back into the textbook and have a look at that second graph there, this one here, y equals x squared, it passes the vertical line test, but the horizontal line test, at that line there, there's 2 values of x for that particular y value. So it fails the horizontal line test. Now this means that many values of x map to one value of y. And it makes sense when you actually draw that diagram. Okay, so the next one is one-to-many and many-to-one. So these 2 types of graphs will actually fail the vertical line test. So they're not a function. They're going to be probably what we call a relation. We don't use that word very often, but we know it's not a function. So if it fails the vertical line test, but it passes the horizontal line test, we would say it's called one-to-many. So in this case, many y values correspond to one x value. Okay, if we jump over into the textbook, which you can use these notes going through today, if you have a look at this function here. Now, it's not one that we actually have looked at yet. It's y squared equals x. But if I took the square root of both of those sides, I'd get y equals y equals the square root of x, which is this part of the curve here. And we have seen this curve, the square root of x. So in this case, it is going to fail the vertical line test because at each vertical point, we're going to have 2 points that the line passes through. But in the horizontal line test, it is going to pass. So that's an example of the one-to-many. And the last one we want to have a look at is the many-to-many. Okay, so it also fails the horizontal line test. Actually, I should backtrack that. It fails the vertical line test and it fails the horizontal line test. And that's called many-to-many. And I'll show you an example of one of those now. And a circle would be a great example of that. If we were to draw vertical lines, it's going to hit at 2 points, no matter where our vertical line is. And if we draw horizontal lines, it's going to hit 2 points, no matter where our horizontal line is. So here's all that stuff summarized. So 1 to 1, many to 1, 1 to many, many to many. Thinking about it, whether or not it passes the vertical line test, the first 2 did, the bottom 2 didn't. And here's what happens in the horizontal line test. So you're probably better off to not memorize that, but understand what it actually means and do those tests yourself. For today's lesson, if you jump over into the textbook, all of that is just summarized in that textbook. Another way that we often could see our 1 to 1, 1 to many, etc., is in this format here. So if we look over here, we've got this side over here. Forgetting the graph down the bottom, we've got each one number on the left goes to many numbers on the right. So that would be 1 to many. And over here, many numbers on the left go to many different numbers on the right, and some of them overlap. So that would be an example of many to many. So there's different ways that we can see it, and your exercise will look at those today. Okay, so check the OneNote for which questions I would like you to go through in 3I. Particularly, it'll be in question 3 and question 4, and some of the ones in 5 and 6. If you get that finished, I want you to mark it, and then another thing I'd like you to do is to start working through the chapter review exercise so we can move on next lesson.